I don't want to give too many personal details because I'm not sure what I'm allowed to talk about and what will get government suits knocking on my door. The Pentagon released those 3 UFO tapes in 2020, so none of this should be too controversial for Uncle Sam. What I will say is that I served in the United States Navy from 2015 to 2019. I spent nearly all my time in the Navy on aircraft carriers, the big ships you see in movies that launch jets off their decks. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out Top Gun. I highly recommend it. I wasn't a pilot or anything cool like that, but I had a good time in the Navy. My best memories are from when I was part of 7th Fleet. Yokosuka was a fun place to be stationed. At least when the sailors and Marines there weren't doing something stupid, it was fun. The command would take away off-base privileges if we got too rowdy in town, and the local authorities complained. Sometimes the Japanese could be a bit touchy about stuff. I won't mention any specific ships, but we patrolled the Pacific around Japan, China, Indonesia, basically all around Asia and the South Pacific. Things were a little hot back then, still are, I hear, because China keeps trying to assert its dominance in the South China Sea. Dumb things, like building bases near major international shipping lanes and then claiming that part of the sea as their territorial waters. Real geopolitical pissing contest stuff. Regardless, we were always on mission. This is around 2017 and 2018, playing chicken with the Chinese Navy, making sure they knew we didn't respect their imaginary boundaries by flying over them. We weren't looking for a fight or anything, but we always prepared like one would break out. It's standard Navy operating procedure. I was an aviation ordnanceman, AO for short, so it was my job to make sure the planes had their weapons serviced and ammo fully stocked for a firefight. The dogs with the biggest teeth fight the least, my chief always said. I was out on the carrier deck one evening loading some ordnance onto a recently returned jet when I heard some chatter on the comms. My headset was a bit crappy, so I couldn't get some of it, but I saw a yellow shirt, the guys who waved the jets in, looking up in the sky intently. I asked the yellow shirt what was up, and he said one of our pilots saw something weird in the air. I was a little jumpy when I heard that. We were close to the disputed border, and I figured China launched a few planes of their own to test our nerve. I didn't want to be a part of an international incident. The pilot was circling the ship at different altitudes. I could make out over the comms that he was searching for something that dropped off his radar. This went on for a while. Eventually, he was ordered to land and refuel. I didn't know the pilot, but I'd seen him around the chow hall in the gym. He had a pretty heavy deadlift, so I've noticed him before. I went over to his plane and checked on his armaments. I knew they were good because my buddy Ryan worked the day shift and his crew put them on, but I wanted to get close enough to hear what the pilot was saying to the yellow shirt. It's crazy loud on the flight deck, so you have to be right on top of people to hear them. The pilot didn't say much, just that he caught something on his radar that was moving strangely, not like a jet, not even obeying basic physics. That was creepy. Maybe a new kind of Chinese drone. Top brass must have liked the idea even less than me because we dropped anchor and stayed put for another 3 days. We had to work port and starboard, meaning half the ship works for 12 hours and the other half works 12, launching and refueling planes on loop while they searched for the strange object. It was miserable. We had just enough time after our shift to shower, eat, and sleep before we had to muster back on the flight deck. The command refused to use the word UFO, but some of the crew was starting to say it couldn't have been a new Chinese drone, and the pilot who saw it was clearly freaked out. I've never been a big believer in UFOs, but on the 3rd night of anchor I saw something that I know human technology cannot do. I was on the flight deck checking the missiles on a jet when an extremely bright bluish light flooded the sky. It wasn't so harsh that we couldn't look at it, but it somehow still illuminated everything perfectly evenly. The strangest thing about it was how the light looked blue, silver, or green depending on what angle you looked at it. The light shot backwards and then up in a zigzag pattern. It didn't accelerate or slow down between maneuvers. It stopped and started like inertia, and air resistance didn't exist. It moved like a giant invisible hand was jerking it around in the sky, like a kid playing with a toy airplane. The light was still for a few minutes, and then slowly circled the carrier deck in a wide arc. It was about a quarter of a mile away, but the light was easy to spot. Our comms gear was going wild. I could hear snippets of voices trying to give us orders, but a metallic humming blocked any coherent messages from getting through. A green shirt finally pieced enough of the message together to know they wanted us to launch every available jet that was currently on the deck. We launched the first plane as fast as we could and watched it take off and bank wide left to approach the humming blue/silver/green light. I don't think anyone on the flight deck was breathing as the plane approached. When the jet got within a few hundred yards, the light just dropped out of the sky like it was a puppet whose strings were cut. We all ran to the edge of the deck, but there was no splash or sound of impact. The light was just gone. For 4 more days, we worked continuously to launch and land planes, searching every inch of ocean for a sign of that strange aircraft. I even heard they pulled one of our ballistic submarines from their post to search the seabed. They never touch the submarines for anything. They are our greatest nuclear deterrent. We spent another 2 days in debriefing rooms where they told everyone on the deck and the control tower who saw the incident to keep our mouths shut. They used legal language, of course, but the message was the same. Not sure if this is still supposed to be hush-hush, what with the release of UFO videos, but I thought it was time I shared my personal experience with them. I live in the heart of Philadelphia, a few blocks north of Center City, just before it starts to get too sketchy. It's always busy and always crowded, so I never expected to come across anything like this. It all happened on what was easily the worst day of my life. I was in Fairmount, near where my girlfriend and our son lived with her parents. Both her mom and dad are lawyers that work for a law firm that defends other lawyers, so they live in a real nice townhouse on North Woodstock Street right behind the Eastern State Penitentiary. If you're not a Philly native, you've probably still heard of the old prison. It was once the most expensive prison in the world and held notorious criminals like Al Capone, but is now just a historic landmark most famous for being an elaborate haunted house around Halloween. I didn't live with my girl and son because we couldn't all fit in my tiny apartment, and her parents were not a big fan of mine. It sucked, but the schools around her parents' neighborhood were fantastic, and I wanted to give my son the best chance. Me and my girl were having a knockdown drag-out fight that night, and we broke up. I was in a bad place. I stormed out of the house and walked down Fairmount Ave towards the bus stop. A bus finally came rolling down the street, but the LCD display board on the front of the bus was blank. It didn't show any destination. Normally they say off-duty if they are not on a route, so I assumed it was just busted. It rumbled to a stop at the bus stop. I walked towards the door, but the unmarked bus started to speed off. I was pissed and chased it down the street. I picked up cans and gravel off the street and threw them at the back of the bus. After about half a block, the bus stopped and the door opened. I was surprised. I didn't expect it to stop after the hissy fit I just threw, and I wasn't sure if I should actually get on. My anger from the fight with Michelle overtook my caution, and I walked onto the bus. I tried to pay, but the driver just smiled and jerked his thumb to the back, indicating for me to take a seat. By all accounts, the bus looked normal, but everything was off. It was all so indistinct. I still can't picture the face of the driver. I couldn't tell you his hair color or what nationality he was. I sat near the back of the bus. There weren't many people on the bus, but everyone I passed looked just as miserable as I did, like this bus was a vehicle for people at their lowest point. I didn't see a single smiling face on the whole bus. We rode for hours, passing indistinct neighborhoods. It all looked familiar, but I couldn't place any local landmarks. It felt like I was touring a movie set built to look like Philadelphia, but wasn't actually the city. I felt an overwhelming sense of lethargy. I wasn't even bothered about where we were going. Occasionally we would stop, and someone would just stand up and get off. The people getting off looked surprised to be leaving. These looked like random spots, but those exiting the bus clearly knew their surroundings. As we drove, I replayed the argument I had with Michelle over and over again in my mind, realizing what I should have said or shouldn't have said. Maybe I had been too harsh and defensive. Maybe I need to be more understanding. We only picked one person up while I was on the bus. It played out very closely to how I got on. The bus stopped and then sped off. Leave the poor soul to chase us down the street. What really struck me, though, was how he seemed to be the only one in the crowd to notice us. There were other people at that bus stop, but they didn't seem to notice us rolling in. Hours or days later, I honestly could not tell you. I had an epiphany. It was a crystallizing moment of clarity where I knew exactly what I had to do. Just as the thought burst into my mind, the bus stopped. I looked out my window and realized we were back on Fairmount. The look of surprise on the other passengers' faces just before they got off the bus suddenly made sense to me. I ran off that bus and knocked on the door to my girlfriend's place. She ripped the door open instantly, like she had been standing right at the doorway. I realized her clothes were the same as when I left her. The sun was in the same position, and everything looked exactly as it had when I left. I told her everything that went through my head on that strange bus, and we are still together to this day. I don't understand what happened, but I know it gave me a second chance. I hope someone can relate to this so I know I'm not going crazy. I don't know what to make of this, and neither do my friends. Maybe some of you can help us understand what the hell happened. I went on a camping trip with a few of my close buddies a few weeks ago in Oregon. We hiked a few trails into the deeper part of the woods, but we remembered where we parked the car and tried to stay within a reasonable distance. We decided to settle in a clearing that was off the trail for at least a mile, a giant rock as our guide to the entrance-exit of our camp. As long as we can find the rock, we know we wouldn't get lost. We thought we had a good couple of hours before the sunset. We were very wrong. There was at least an hour left of daylight last time I checked. I pulled out my phone and it was only 4:45 p.m. in the summer. Why the hell was it about to be night? My friends and I brushed it off. Maybe our phones were wrong and we need to reset them. It wasn't that dark yet, so we just put our backpacks down where we settled down. Since we could still see each other, we decided to split up to make setting up camp go faster. I collected stones for the campfire walls, Mason gathered wood, Josh would stay behind and set up tents, and Austin got ready to cook our dinner. I couldn't really find big enough rocks, so I went a little further into the woods. This part of the forest was a bit denser than the rest, and I thought I was gone for only a few minutes, but then I heard Josh calling for me. I came back to our site, and our conversation went like this. I said, "What's up? I heard you yell my name." Josh responded, "What?" I said again, "You yelled my name. What did you need?" Josh said, "I didn't say your name at all." I just responded with, "Oh, okay." I went back to where I left off and grabbed a few more stones. When I got back to our pit area, I started setting them up in a circle. Mason started setting his sticks into the pit when I was finished. By now we had a campfire, our tents were just about set up, and Austin was dragging out the cooler with all of the meat we packed for the trip. We got the fire going and we were just sitting around the fire telling stories. After a while we heard some rustling in the bushes. We looked over and shined our flashlight over where we heard the noise. All we saw was a large buck running away. It was strange, but again we are in the middle of a forest. After we sat around the fire for a while, me and my friends were ready to call it a night. We got in our tents and went to bed. I woke up a few hours later hearing someone or something in our cooler. I unzipped my tent and shone my flashlight around our campsite. I looked around until I saw a shape near our supplies. It was that buck again. I could only see the right side of it, but it was just that deer getting into our cooler. Wait a minute, that's the meat cooler. Why would a deer be eating meat? Before I could think anything else, I saw the deer get up on two legs and arch its head up. It looked like it was sniffing the air for something. Then it started to scream. This scream was not normal for a deer or any animal. I quickly zipped my door back up and turned off my flashlight. I thought if whatever the hell that was didn't know I saw it, then it will go away. I texted my friends and told them to stay in their tents and to keep quiet. I hope they saw my text. I waited for what felt like hours before I decided to peek outside again. When I peeked out, I saw a red eye staring right back at me. That deer, or whatever the hell it was closer and stared right back at me. It wasn't right up against the tent, but that thing had a sinister smile on its face, and it was smiling at me. I saw half of its face rotting off, and I gagged when I smelled it from what looked to be half a yard away. I yelled for my friends to get out of their tents and run to the car. I went past the rock and made a beeline for our car. I felt like I was running forever until I saw it, and I unlocked it using my key fob. I looked at the trail and saw my friends running to the car as well. It looked like I wasn't the only one who saw it. We couldn't speak. Even if we wanted to, no words would come out. We don't even know how to explain what we saw. That night, we slept in the car with the doors locked. We didn't go back until morning to retrieve our stuff. We didn't want to run into that thing again. When we got back to the site, everything looked normal. Nothing else was taken. There were no rips in any of the tents. Nothing. We still decided we wanted to get out of there ASAP, so we quickly packed everything and we left. We drove off quickly and put the forest miles behind us. We never want to go back to that place again. A few hours later that day, I got a text from Josh. He asked me, "Where are you guys?" I looked in the mirror and I saw Josh sitting right there, but he wasn't holding his phone. I decided the best thing to do was to keep quiet for the rest of the car ride. I didn't want Josh or whatever it was to know I caught on. Me and my friends dropped Josh off at his house. He didn't say a word, but just walked into his house and shut the door. I haven't seen him come out in weeks. What did we just bring back home with us? It's been 10 years, and I still recall that night as clear as day. My parents were big into hiking through trails, and we used to go to every state park we could. I was around 8 at the time and curious as ever. I was never allowed to, but sometimes I wanted to go off trail and explore on my own. I guess growing up hiking, I wasn't afraid of venturing off. Nighttime soon approached and we hunkered down for the evening. We were all exhausted, so by the time we set up our tents, we fell asleep almost instantly. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and having to go to the bathroom really bad. I didn't feel like waking either one of my parents to let them know. I thought I'll be quick, so there's really no need to. I went about 20 feet away from camp to relieve myself. After washing up, I just looked up at the starry night. It was cool and breezy, and you could hear the sounds of nightlife in the forest. It felt so nice out I didn't want to go back to the tent just yet. After all, I was 8 and full of life and curiosity. I decided to venture around a little bit with just me and my flashlight. Nearby, I discovered a little river with some fallen trees. I sat down on a log and just sulked in that fresh night air. Not too long after, I heard footsteps crunching on leaves behind me. I stood up, turning to look, thinking my parents must have noticed I was gone and came looking for me. When I flashed my light in that direction, I was greeted by a park ranger. I don't know what it was, but I felt I was safe in his presence. "You out exploring, little fellow," he said to me. I replied back, "I'm out exploring." He chuckled and sat just below along the riverbank. "Yeah, I've been exploring out here for a while now myself," he responded. I remember looking at his uniform and thinking it looked different from uniforms I've seen other park rangers wear. Instead of khaki shorts and a polo t-shirt, he was wearing white pants with high-top, scuffed-up black boots. I had asked him if the uniform he was wearing was a new one because I never saw one like it. He responded that they were standard-issued clothes, but he told me they didn't keep him that warm. He proceeded to show me his long, dingy wool coat and said that was the only warm article of clothing he had. I was only in my pajamas and a short-sleeved t-shirt and was shivering a bit. He walked over and wrapped his coat around me and said, "Here, fella, this ought to do the trick." He was right. The coat warmed me right up. We talked a little more, and as curious as I was, I kept badgering him with question after question. The more we conversed, the more I realized how different his accent was, like he wasn't from the area. By this time, we had to have been talking for about an hour, if not longer. I asked him if he was camping nearby with his family, and he had said he was out with his army. I remember thinking, why there is an army in the woods? When I questioned him about it, he seemed lost as to why they were even in the area. Certain questions seemed to stump him, like he lost his train of thought. He explained they were going to battle the British for their freedom, and at 8 years old I figured it was grown-up stuff that was going on and I didn't know about it. He had mentioned George Washington, and immediately light bulbs went off and I blurted out saying I know who that is and recently learned about him in my history class. He chuckled, saying, "Yep, that's our commander and he gives orders on where to go." I looked at him puzzled and said, "I thought he died a long time ago." To which he replied, "No, he's still very much alive." Being a kid, if a grown-up tells you one thing, most of the time they're right, so I brushed it off, assuming I heard wrong in school. I heard splashing in the water and flashed my light on it, seeing fishing jumping up from the river. The man gasped in awe. "What kind of lantern is that?" I giggled, saying it was just a flashlight, and handed it to him. He reluctantly took it and examined it. I showed him the switch to turn it on and off, and he was just baffled. "How do you kill the flame and reignite it so quickly?" he asked. I explained it wasn't a flame and it was powered by batteries. I looked at him puzzled and asked if he had ever seen one before. He shook his head while still examining it and clicked the switch on and off. I told him he could have it since I had another one back at camp. "That's mighty kind of you," he replied. "Why don't I trade you for it instead?" he said. He stood and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, shiny, painted soldier figurine. My eyes lit up as he handed it to me. He smiled and sighed, standing back up. "All right, I best be on my way back to camp," he said. I stood up with him. "Yeah, I should go back too." I took off the coat he had put on me. "Here, you'll need this to keep warm," I said. He nodded and slid it on before reaching his hand out to shake mine. I put the figurine in my pocket and I shook his hand. He began walking off and turned back. "If you see any lads dressed like me, let 'em know camp's just up the mountain." I nodded and watched him vanish into the woods. I made my way back to the tent and went to sleep. The next morning when I woke up, I remembered the figurine he gave me and searched my pockets for it. I looked everywhere and couldn't find it. I was so bummed because I wanted to show my friends when I went back to school. A few years went by and I finally pieced together the outfit the man was wearing was one of a soldier during the Revolutionary War. I couldn't believe my 8-year-old self had a talk with a ghost from then. I never told anyone about that night, but I recall it so clearly and how real he seemed. I wished I had met him when I was older because I would have had so many questions to ask. I've returned to that same spot we camped at in hopes of seeing him at night by that riverside. You hear that kids can see the dead, and maybe that's that. He could still be here, but since I'm older, I'm not able to see him. If I have kids one day, I may take them to that spot in hopes they meet the wondrous ghost I met. This happened to me a few summers ago while working as a ranger. It took that long for me to get my thoughts on paper. I don't want to give too many specifics. I'm afraid those guys with guns will come asking questions if I do. I lived and worked in upstate New York, and I'm fortunate enough to have miles of peaceful hiking trails all around me. It was Saturday morning and I had off, but I wanted to get out and hike a trail I hadn't been on in a while, doing routine patrols. This particular trail was usually a little more crowded, so I avoided it when possible, but it had some beautiful vistas, and I was in need of some soul-soothing after this week at work. That morning I followed my usual pre-hike routine and stopped for a cup of coffee at the diner on the edge of town. I was good friends with the owner, and I always let him know when I was heading out for a day trip and what time I would be back. Hiking 101 always lets someone know when you're hitting the trail. Leaving town and heading towards the mountain, a group of 3 park ranger SUVs with flashing lights overtook and passed me on the road. Seeing them wasn't too unusual. After all, there were lots of state parks in the vicinity. But they seemed to be in quite a rush, and I'm pretty sure they didn't have the standard National Park Service emblem painted on anywhere. I had a 45-minute drive, so I put the news on to catch up on recent events. I couldn't stomach more than 10 minutes of that, though. Normal politician lying through his teeth garbage, so I turned it off. As soon as I killed the radio, I heard a whopping noise coming from straight overhead. I slowed down and poked my head out of the window, looking up, and sure enough, there were 2 helicopters heading straight in the same direction. Just great, missing hiker. I know it's selfish, and I admit it, but my only thought in the moment was that I hoped that they hadn't closed the trail off. I'd blown off plans with a coworker so I could hike this trail, and if I drove all the way out here just to have to turn around, I'd be pretty pissed. Finishing the drive and parking in the small lot at the trailhead, I was relieved to see the path wasn't roped off. What's more, there was only one other car there, so I would have the trail basically all to myself. I tied my boots off, slipped on my hiking pack, and got going. I heard the copters once or twice after I had gotten started, but didn't see them again, and they sounded far off. Hopefully they found whoever was missing, and quickly. I just wanted a quiet walk in the woods without any modern interruptions. I had even left my phone in the car since I didn't get service anyway. I tend to look down when I'm hiking, on the lookout for any roots or rocks that could cause me to trip, only looking up often enough to ensure I didn't walk face first into a branch. I had been going this way for a good hour and a half when I saw it. Some kind of mega-sized paw print stuck out clearly on the trail. I had seen black bears while I was out before, and though not common, it happened enough for me to want to carry bear spray in my pack. I followed the prints another few feet until they went off the trail. I'm not a hunter or tracker, so I couldn't follow them into all the brush. And besides, who wants ticks? I was a little freaked out, but had never actually heard of anyone even really being attacked. I just decided to carry my bear spray in my hand and keep trekking. I had only gone a few more miles before I decided to take another rest and grab a drink of water. The sun was high in the sky at this point, and it was getting hot. I found a big enough rock to sit on under a tree and sat down for a minute. As soon as I did, I heard shouting coming from up ahead around a bend in the trail. It sounded like a man's voice. I couldn't make out what he was saying, and I was worried that maybe he had seen the bear or something. But then I remembered the potential missing hiker and thought it must be them, or maybe somebody who found them and was yelling for help. I stashed my canteen and started off in a trot towards the voice. I kept my bear spray handy, though, just in case. I rounded the bend and was immediately hit with a wall of stench like something I had never smelled before. It was so bad that I actually stopped in my tracks, trying to hold back this morning's coffee. The shouting was getting louder, heading in my direction, and now I could pick up what sounded like multiple voices. Between trying not to puke and trying to listen to the yelling, I only first caught the thing out of the corner of my eye. Something had stepped from behind a large tree onto the trail only about 20 feet away. Something massive. Turning to give it my full attention, I can't really describe what I felt. Terror is probably as close as I can get. Whatever this thing was, had to be at least 9 feet tall. Thick, curly brown hair covered it head to toe, and its arms had to be 4 feet long at least. Everything about this thing screamed ape or some kind of prehistoric creature, except its face. I could make out what definitely looked like humanish features, just bigger or oversized, I don't know. I couldn't help but make eye contact. The thing was staring right at me. I was squeezing the can of bear spray so hard I thought I was going to break it. I didn't even notice the smell at this point. The creature slowly raised its arms into the air, and I braced for whatever was about to happen. It stopped with its arms stretched out, palms facing me. The kind of gesture you make to someone when you're trying to avoid a fight. The creature's eyes were wide and its lips seemed like they were trembling. It was afraid. Another shout came from close by up the trail. A look of terror passed the creature's face. It gave me one last look and then bolted off the path into the undergrowth. I should have heard it crashing through the forest for long after, being how big it was, but almost as suddenly as it disappeared, I stopped hearing it. I stood there in shock. What the hell had I just witnessed? Not a minute later, 3 guys came running down the trail towards me and slowed down as soon as they saw me. These guys were dressed in all black, and each one carried an assault rifle. I'm not much of a gun guy, but these looked like things that would be used in a war zone. They approached me and started hammering me with questions. What was I doing here? Was I alone? What was my name? I gave them my name, my real name. Looking back, I really wish I hadn't. But when you see something like I just saw, and then 3 armed men appear from nowhere and begin questioning you, you're not really thinking strategically. They told me that there was bear attack nearby and that I needed to turn around and leave the trail immediately. I had absolutely no objections. When we parted, I heard one of them say over their radio, "Civilian returning to the trailhead, ETA 90 minutes. I made it in 60. I heard the helicopters a lot more on the way back. When I got back to my car, there was another guy sitting on a dirt bike, dressed in all black and sporting the same rifle. The other car was gone, and the guy didn't say a word to me, just watched me as I got back in my Jeep and drove off. I got back home, locked the doors, and just sat on the couch for the rest of the day. I closed all the blinds too. I didn't even want to glance outside. I checked the local news for a few days afterwards and never saw any mention of a bear attack. I asked around with a few trail vets that I knew, and 1 or 2 had heard some rumors but nothing concrete. I think about that incident every single day. I remember how scared that thing was and how it could have ripped me apart if it wanted to. I wonder if it got away. Honestly, I hope it did. I had a long career as a home caregiver, home health aide or whatever they call it now. There were fewer titles when I started. I have a lot of stories to tell. Weird things happen in the homes of the sick and dying. Sometimes it felt like I was following the unexplained as I passed through the doors of a new client. That's why I was always a step behind, always reacting to the weird happenings instead of preventing them. The strangeness got there first. I was playing catch-up with the supernatural. My responsibilities included housekeeping and running errands, as well as bathing, dressing, and grooming any clients who were incapable of such on their own. I was never involved in any formal treatment or medication. My clients were either healthy enough to avoid constant medical attention or were terminal and had elected to forego any further treatment. My company called them long-term or short-term patients. Kind of cruel, but it was at least accurate. The story I want to share today is about a short-term patient, and it's about a dog. When I listed my responsibilities earlier, you'll remember that pet care was not among them. I was never asked to take care of dogs, cats, or any other family pets. By the time I arrived at a home, the client had already learned that they were in no condition to take care of an animal. That was not the case here. Upon arrival, I entered the modest single-story home with the key my company provided. I called out as instructed and loudly introduced myself. The woman of the house, I'd been told, was hard of hearing. She didn't speak much either, although that I learned after the fact. I found her in her room. She spent most of her time there, using a metal walker to alternate between her recliner and her bed. She was thin, pale, and greenish-looking. She had a head of wiry white hair that bunched up into a ball of tight curls. There was always a pair of elegant earrings in her ears. Her appearance ultimately was not that out of the ordinary. I know greenish-looking sounds cruel or monstrous, but I assure you that with some conditions it becomes quite normal. What was abnormal, I noticed after some time, was her earrings. I don't know where they came from. Every day, a new pair. I'd help her with her bath and her wardrobe. I'd leave to make her first meal of the day, and when I returned, earrings. I assumed the most basic of explanations. She was a distrustful old woman who didn't want her caregiver rummaging through her jewelry. Fair enough. What I could not explain was the dog. After that first day of work, I put the woman of the house to bed and prepared to leave. I'd be back in just 10 hours. I was eager to get home. When I opened the front door to step onto the porch, there was a large black dog waiting for me. It ran. I only saw a muzzle and a flash of mangy dark fur. A neighborhood mutt, I assumed. Maybe my client fed the animal before their condition took a turn for the worse. I silently agreed to watch out for the dog in the future and locked up for the night. My imagination, maybe. Maybe I'd heard it walking across the porch outside and thought the sound was closer than it was. I told myself that the streak of mud in the kitchen had come from my boots and not from something else. The next day, my client was noticeably more ill, bedridden from dawn to dusk. And they stayed that way for days. After laying her down early one evening as she asked to sleep at more and more frequent intervals, I resumed a few of the cleaning tasks that I'd neglected throughout the day. This time I saw it, unmistakably inside, waiting for me at the end of the hallway. It looked like a retriever, except for the matted black hair. The coat was short and curly, the snout long and eyes bright. I yelled and stepped toward it. Yet again, it fled. I tried to chase the animal to see how it was sneaking in and out of the house, but as soon as I reached the end of the hallway, it was gone. Muddy tracks carved a path through the house, but ultimately faded into nothing. I said it earlier, I was playing catch-up. Always one step behind. I called my company and asked about the dog. I contacted a few distant family members of my client and asked around the neighborhood. No one knew the origins of this animal. Animal control went through the house that week and verified that there were no visible entrances for any animal, let alone an adult dog, to sneak through. Since the last sighting, though, the lady of the house had gotten worse. She didn't leave the bed anymore. I thought my time with her was coming to an end. Even if it was, I cut our time even shorter. One night I entered her room and the dog was on her chest. I saw it. I know it was there. I saw it, and as the light from the hallway touched its body, it vanished. I stood in shock, staring at my sleeping client under her sheets, staring at the muddy paw prints on her blanket. I requested a transfer the next day. I don't know what ultimately happened to that woman. Maybe that makes this story less rewarding than it could be. But taking care of pets wasn't in my job description, and neither was chasing ghosts around a house. I chose to get out of there, and because of that, I have this and many other stories to tell. You can tell me if I made the wrong call. What I'd really like to know, however, is if anyone else has seen that dog,